Well, hello people, and welcome to a simple Cites Skylines 2 road tutorial. Hope you're having a wonderful day. Today we're going to talk through the road basics, what all of the new options mean on the bottom left menu, some of the new cut and fill and key wall retaining stuff we've seen in the early access series, plus how our new highway roads behave, and just some general road tips and tricks that will help you get used to how they all function in the game. Those with experience of Cites Skylines might find this a little bit rudimentary, but we're going way back to basics here with the new game, so settle in. Definitely advise you play along with this as well, help you get to grips with it a lot easier. But otherwise, let's dive into it, shall we? For this example here, I'm going to grab my 2-lane road and we're going to run through all of these tools and what they're referring to, and how the new snapping options also behave. So our first tool is straight, pretty self-explanatory, okay? So it's just going to go from A to B, we'll draw very simple, straight, rudimentary boxes. Nothing overly complicated about this one. Performs pretty similarly to how it does in Cites Skylines 1. Nice, straight, easy roads. There's also something you might notice here, and you see that I can't align to the middle of the road. We'll cover this why it's happening. This is a snapping option that's preventing this from happening. What you do want to do is come down to the bottom left here and turn off snap to zoning cell length. This will then let you align to the right, the middle, or the left lane of the roads. So you want to make sure that that is off. You turn it back on, you'll see we snap to the length of a cell, so we can't align in the middle. So if you're looking for that functionality, that is how you achieve it. Our next tool is Simple Curve, and again, very similar to its Cities 1 counterpart. You're going to draw it up, you're going to click, and then you're going to bring it over. So if you want a perfect curve, you would draw out by 112 meters like you would here. Click once, and then you're going to notice this new measurement to see another 112. Click that, and then you're going to have a perfect curve, and then you can draw it off that way as well. So Simple Curve functions very similar to the Curve tool from Cities 1, if you've any experience with that. Next up is a new addition. This is the Complex Curve, so it's essentially a simple curve but with an extra bend in it, okay? So if you want to create, for example, you have two roads that aren't perfectly in line with one another and you'd like to connect them, then this is where the complex curve would come in handy. So you can simply draw up, click once, then bring that next click over to the guideline of the road you want to connect to, click again, and then create the curve, and then it will connect in like so. So it allows you to connect two roads that aren't perfectly in line with each other while still maintaining an aesthetically pleasing curve. In my 100 hours in the game so far, Complex Curve isn't something I've found myself using overly often, but it is a handy tool should you need it. The next tool here is Continuous Curve, which functions very similar to the Freeform tool from Cities Skylines 1. You can just click and curve, and just keep clicking and curving in whatever different shapes and styles you want. You can maintain straight angles here, you can come down to create loops, and every time you click, the road on the end of it just continues to extend. So very much how you'd kind of play with Freeform tool from Cities Skylines 1. It's nice and easy to use, and tends to be the tool I use the most often if I'm not after perfectly straight roads. I will tend to use the Continuous Curve tool. The next tool here is our Grid Formation tool, which is brand new to Cities Skylines 2. And it's pretty useful for creating those generic suburban shapes if you're not after too much of a customized area. So the way this works, you can do this off of an existing road, or you can do it entirely on its own. So I'm going to grab the alleyway here. I've got my grid tool selected. I'm going to drag along here, and I'm going to bring this up by 112 meters again. And then I'm going to click, and then whichever way I move now, the game will start to generate that grid. I can move it left, I can move it up and down, I can move it as deep as I like and as wide as I like, and the game will automatically adjust those frames so it fits in exactly how you want it to be, really. So we could bring this all the way down here to about there. Once you click, it's going to form that grid and leave it in there. Something you should be aware of is when you do this, most of the time it's going to generate a traffic light for the road that connects into. You want to come into your road services and actually grab the traffic light tool and then just right click it. This way it's going to get rid of that traffic light. Otherwise, you're going to end up with too many traffic lights along your arterial road. So just be wary of that if you are going to use the grid tool. The grid tool will work with pretty much any road, even your highway roads you can make a grid out of. if you wish. I don't know for what reason you would need to do this, but if you want to, you can do. I tend to not really use this. If I want grids, I tend to want them as a specific size, and you don't really have control over how big these frames are. They're kind of preset, and they'll shift and change based on those presets that the game has coded into it. And see, as they get bigger, they kind of change. But yeah, you can never change the cell depth, which is a little bit of a shame. But if you're just after some quick gridded infrastructure, the grid tool is a great option to go for. So now let's come on to the next tool, which is the replace, which is essentially upgrade now for those that are familiar with the Cites Skylines one. So we want to click this, and then we will grab a different road, for example, a 2-lane one-way road here, and then we can upgrade one of these alleyways into that road. Okay, just a simple left click. If you want to change direction, it's now different. So if you have a one-directional road, you want to left click and then drag the opposite way of which way you want to upgrade. So you want to click it and then drag it the way you want to go. So you see as I move my mouse back and forth, the direction of the road changes. It's no longer just a right click to change it like it was in CS1. You want to left click and draw these the back and forth. And this is how you will get that to change. You'll also notice that when you come to upgrade these roads that they're trying to snap into quite an obvious preset, okay? So what you want to do here is just turn off existing geometry and zoning cell length, and you'll notice that that upgrade becomes much more fluid. It's not trying to snap in between. So if you find, you want to upgrade it into specific cell differences, then you can do that as well. Just be wary you are going to break any preset grids there because you are misaligning the grid if you turn off these snapping options. So that's it for the tool mode options, all pretty easy to get to grips with. The most difficult one probably being complex curve, but I've not found myself using it that often, but it is handy to have. Like I said, if you've got two roads aren't parallel but you want them to have a bend, complex curve will do that for you. Now we'll come on to the new elevation changes that are available with CS2. So we will just snap into this little grid we've got over here on these road frames. So we can increase the height by 10 meters, and this will go on up to a maximum of 50 meters to create enormous bridges if you wanted to. Bring it back down. However, you can control that elevation step by 4 points now using this new tool over on the right here. You change it, it's going to bring it down by half every time, essentially. So now go to 2.5, do it again, and we'll go to 1.25 this time. So really handy, much more control over these elevation changes now. So each elevation step is going to reduce the height by half every time. So we want to come up by 5 meters here, we're going to get a nice little embanked road, and then we can just draw that in. And that'll give you that kind of embanked key road, which looks really cool. I really love this new functionality that's in Cities 2 for the road tools, so you can have a fully embanked road or use this up against a waterfront if you like. There's various different sort of applications for it if you want to think of that. It's also worth noting that a road will become a bridge at 8.75 meters off the ground, and it will remain embanked anything below that. So you see you've got 7.5 meters here, remains embanked, so you go up that single extra step to 8.75, and then it does become a bridge. So if you are looking for a bridge rather than an embankment, you've got to make sure you're at least that much off of the ground. And another big thing I'm a huge fan of is you'll notice on the new road tools that we now have an angle snap, which we had before, but it's a lot more clearer and precise now. You'll see the width of the road now measured in meters, and you'll also see this little icon here, which is a minus 5.5%. This is actually referring to the gradient of the road. So from the start of the road down to the end of it, it is falling by inclined degree of minus 5.5%, meaning that it's going downhill by that much. Incredibly useful addition into Cites Skylines for getting properly gradient roads, especially train lines as well. See, this one here is a little steeper at minus 6.4. So really useful just to see how steep that road is rather than having to eyeball it. I'm a real big fan of the new elevation and all this kind of precision engineering that's now factored into them as you draw them. It just makes it a lot easier to get precise road networks in. So that's your elevation, nice and simple, much more control. Now come on to our new parallel mode function, which is really cool, for example drawing in a kind of a national highway road if you like. So we'll come into our 2-lane one-way highway, we will turn on parallel mode, and you'll now see this new option appear. So at the minute it says 1, and we can decrease the offset, and what this is referring to is the distance between the two parallel roads. For example, this is a 0.5 distance. If we increase this to 1, you'll see it's slightly wider. Let's go up a few more steps now, maybe go up to 5, and you'll see it gets much wider. So these two icons here, you can either decrease the width or increase the width, and you will see that reflected within your parallel road tool. So really handy to have that in. Perfect for drawing in highway networks. Obviously you'll have one that comes with the map, or if you want to go off and do your own or extend this. So for example, we could do kind of a couplet system here if we like. So we can see here that this one is just one unit apart. So we could grab our continuous curve tool and we could just draw this out, okay, and create a couplet system that goes off and up into your city or wherever you want to take it. So exceedingly useful tool. No longer now do you need to go back and draw one road in and then mirror it against the other. It's all just incredibly seamless now and all blends together to create. It's just crazy, isn't it? You compare this to CS1's vanilla road tools. It's absolute night and day. Incredibly flexible. I'm a big fan of these new road tools, and they just allow for so much more sort of diversification and different designs to come in. So definitely have a play with it. Road tools, nice and easy to use. Just select the icon, set your width, and then you're away. So you can also use the parallel road tool to create a parallel with an existing network without creating a new parallel network, if that makes sense. So an example of this would be to grab a train line, set it to a parallel mode of 5 units, and then just follow the existing road infrastructure with the parallel tool, and this way the new train line will be continually parallel with this already existing road infrastructure. So really handy tip, keep it in small segments, keep it moving, and you'll just see now that without having to follow any road guidelines and try and get perfect mirroring, the road tool or the parallel road tool will do it for you. So nice little kind of hidden bonus functionality of the parallel road tool is that you can use it against existing networks if indeed you want to run, for example, a national train line parallel with a national highway, then you can do that. So pretty useful little bonus tip for the parallel road tool, works nicely in that sort of fashion. So now let's run over our new snapping options. There are a few new ones here to take note of. So you can toggle all of them on and off just by hitting the asterisk icon, which is pretty self-explanatory. Snapping to existing geometry is a pretty cool feature. So what this will do is you'll notice as I kind of bring my road around an existing road, also known as existing geometry, to the snapping option, is that it snaps into it, right, as it gets close to it. That is what snap to existing geometry is controlling. So if I were to remove that, you'll now notice that there is no definitive snap now. I can kind of move this road anywhere I want to go and it'll just kind of blend around it. This works for everything, for train lines, tram tracks. Snap to geometry will do this for you. So what this is very useful for is bringing two networks very close together, kind of without them actually linking, so you could have this slip road here that runs parallel to the arterial without it ever connecting. You can get it as close as you like, essentially. So that is what existing geometry will refer to. Next up we have zoning cell length, which at the minute is off, and you can see as I snap into existing geometry, this just glides nice and smoothly. Okay, I can start this road from wherever I want and go in whichever direction. But if I were to turn on zoning cell length, you'll notice there's a distinctive snap now as I snap to the length of the cell zones. Snap to 90 degrees is exactly what it says on the tin. You're just going to snap to a solid angle rather than it being kind of really flexible, so you can go wherever you like without angle on. There's no real definitive kind of clicky snap. But if we were to turn on snap to 90 degrees, you can see it really locks itself in as you come into that 90-degree angle snap there. There's a real snappiness to it as it comes back in. Okay, so if you want in perfect 90-degree angles without fracturing your zoning, then you want to make sure that you're snapping to 90-degree angles. Next up is snap to the sides of a building, which is really useful because of course now we can place buildings away from the roads without actually having to place them on a road first, which is a massive quality of life improvement. So let's, for example, just go ahead and grab our elementary school. It's going to tell us that there's a road required, of course, and you'll get this little icon here. So if I want to place this away from an existing road network frame, I'd obviously have to come in and give it a road, and I could kind of eyeball it. It's like, oh, you're kind of colliding with the building there, it's overlapping a little bit. At which point I can say, well, okay, then let's snap to the sides of a building, and you'll notice as you do that and you bring your road close to it, there's a very, again, kind of clicky snap that you can draw in along that building there. And this will actually apply to kind of all edges of the building here. We can bring it right up alongside this side. You'll see again, it really snaps into it, even with all the other options off. You can really see it just clicking. You even get the little marker as you go past it if you wanted to totally envelop the asset in road. And you do even get the road guidelines as to how to do that. Of course, this is on an elevation. This is not particularly the best example, but snap to building will literally just snap to the sides of a building. Very useful if you're looking to place a building away from a road network frame first, and then come in and give it its road connections. The next option is snap to guidelines, which is essentially replacing road guideline snapping now. And this will just snap to definitive guidelines of your frame. So the end of a road here, for example, if I wanted to line up within the middle and get this orientated, then I could. However, you can still see I'm snapping to zoning cell length, so I wanted to get in the middle, I'd have to turn that off like we talked about earlier. So you wanted to align it with this guideline and then draw it off at a 90-degree angle and then come back in and align this one, then of course you could. So snap to guidelines is essentially snapping to road guidelines from Cites 1. Nice and easy to use, pretty self-explanatory that one. The next option here is to snap to zone grid, and this is just allowing you to snap into the grid here if you're wanting to make kind of more specifically planned and proper infrastructure. Then you could do snap to zone grid. You'll notice as we move across the grid now that there's a very kind of obvious definitive snap as we come into them. Okay, so without it, nice and freeform. With it on, it's going to snap into those grid squares, which again you can then draw up and out like such. And the last option here is to show contour lines, which will just show those topography layers. If indeed you're building on terrain and you need to know just how steep you're working with, then you can turn them on and off with this last button down here that says show contour lines. Now I know a lot of you are going to be looking at this video wondering how do I stop my zones from fracturing, because this is a very common problem that at least a lot of us in the early access group first experienced. And the ones that tend to really hammer it off and kind of break it is snapping to guidelines. You want to make sure that this is off, because if you're drawing out here, and rather than snapping to the perfect 90-degree sort of grid frame here to keep all the zoning tight, you might be hitting another guideline of a road that's, say, let's go for like down here or something, right, on a kind of totally different orientation to this road right here. And if we were to draw it off like this and I snap to the guideline instead, it's now snapping to a new orientation, which you can see fractures my grid frame, right? So you really want to make sure that when you're drawing, you don't want your zones to be broken, turn off guidelines. It will make it significantly easier to keep that whole grid. And this will stay true for whatever type of road you're doing. So if you have a big arterial junction here, a big kind of cross junction, just make sure that road guideline snapping is off. It will do you a world of good. Also, snapping to the side of a building can also mess with it as well if you do have buildings around this particular area. So the best thing to maintain perfect grid networks is to turn off guidelines so you're not snapping to a different grid orientation. But just by sticking to those rules, you're going to maintain perfect grid structure wherever you go. And you can also see as well, you know, that kind of outer blue silhouette, you want to make sure that's filling the zoning grids where you actually want to fill. And then you're just going to make sure everyone sticks nice and easy. The new kind of zoning grid mechanic for Cites 2 is a lot more flexible than it was in CS1, so it might be a little bit kind of difficult to get used to at first, but just stick with it, get a feel for it, and eventually you'll be drawing in perfect kind of unbroken grids before you know it. But again, road guideline off for that, you'll have a much better time and be able to maintain those perfect grid structures just like so. So we'll also talk about the new road services where we've mentioned turning traffic lights on and off. So this must be unlocked via the development tree. It is this one here, Advanced Road Services. It's one of the first things you can unlock, and honestly, I'd probably suggest it is the first thing you should unlock as well. It only costs 1 development point. But once you have unlocked it, this menu under your Roads tab will become available. But there are a few things here that we'll run through. The Road Maintenance Depot will look after your roads, will clear snow, it will help with traffic accident cleanup, and should be a building that you place in and around your city. You're going to want to maintain the roads. Our first tool here which we covered is the traffic light function, where you can right click to remove or left click to add. Same process again with the stop signs. You can remove with a right click and add them with the left click. It will revert it back to traffic lights. If you want stop signs or traffic lights, entirely up to you. Thankfully the game now comes with turn control, which is a massive improvement to the vanilla function. So you have no left turn, no straight ahead, and no right turn. And again, what you want to do is just left click to add it, or you can also right click on the road again to remove it. You can also do the same thing over here as well. You can also remove all turns entirely, but this will make the road unusable, as you can see by the road markings on the road there. So you want to make sure you at least have some sort of directionality for your roads to turn. Same thing again with crosswalks. You want to left click to add, right click to remove. This can be useful if you have a particularly busy pedestrian crossing and it's starting to cause traffic backups, in which case you would remove the pedestrian crossing, but don't forget to go ahead and add in a pedestrian pathway over the road in order so your Sims can still get across the road, because when you remove the pedestrian crossing, it entirely stops them from being able to cross, so make sure that's something you address. The next tool here is the ability to add wide sidewalks, which will stop your Sims from being able to park on the road. And it should be noted you need to add this to each side of the street. It's not just a one click for one road. You'll see as you move your tooltip across it that it does affect both sidewalks, so add it to one and then add it to the other if you need. And like I said, it does stop Sims from being able to park on your roads if you have wide sidewalks. Next up is the grass strip, which again you can add to both sides of the road if you want. Left click will remove, also remove the wide sidewalk as well. Let's say for example if I only wanted grass on this side of the street, and then maybe I also wanted some trees with it as well, then the left and right click functions are going to both add and remove for you, depending on what you want to do. The next option here is lighting for your highways. Now you will notice that the highways do not come automatically lit anymore. You actually need to add lighting onto them, which is a pretty cool thing. You definitely want to kind of light the run up to your intersections, right, and in more populous areas. But what this will also do, if you check your power lines, you'll see that we have the low voltage cables under our main roads. However, we don't have them under our highways. Now this can be changed if you add lighting to your highways as such. So now this highway has lights on it, and we'll see that it now carries a low voltage cable. If you're wanting to transfer power over a larger distance via the roads instead of power lines, which I wouldn't suggest doing anyway, I would just use the electricity cable for that. But you can make them appear under your highways if you want to. It might be convenient in some specific scenarios, but that's something you're going to want to do if indeed you want power lines and lighting on your highway roads. Again, this only works with highway roads. You can't do it on a regular road. You'll see it just doesn't interact with it, but it will with a highway. And the last option here is to add a sound barrier, which will reduce the noise pollution caused by a highway. So you can see here we have not a particularly loud highway, it's only very slightly yellow. But if we add sound barriers to it, again for which you can add to both sides of the road if you wish, but once you do that, it will very slightly reduce the noise pollution. This is more of an aesthetic thing for me. I never really suffer with noise pollution mechanics in the game, but it kind of really frames your highway and makes it more of a crash barrier for me rather than a sound barrier. But if you do have a highway passing nearby to residential and they are starting to complain of that noise pollution, then you can reduce it ever so slightly by just adding the sound barrier to it. So those are your new road services. Pretty easy, self-explanatory tools to get to grips with. So now let's come on to one of my favourite uses of the new road tools here, and this is using roads to create a key wall, because key walls are no longer in the game. Imagine down the line they might come with the DLC. But for this, what you want to do is to grab your terraforming tools. There is also a terraforming tutorial up on the channel as well if you want to know how to use the new tree brushes, slopes and shift terrains and whatnot. So if you want to check that out, there's also a link for that on the channel too. But what you want to do first of all is to grab your level terrain tool, and what we want to do is create a flat layer underneath the water where you want your key road to go. So for example, right here, I'm just going to flatten all of this out so it's nice and easy to use. Then likewise along the top of the shoreline where I want my key to sit, you also want to flatten that out as well, so that those two kind of flattened levels meet on a very obvious contour line like so, okay? So having it nice and flat before you start building here is going to make getting this key wall in a lot easier. So just like this, you want to line up those contour lines so they're nice and neat with each other wherever you want to create your key wall. So you have something that looks roughly a little bit like that, okay? So you've kind of got the natural shoreline here, and then you've got your terraformed one. Then come into whichever road you want to use for this. For example, it could be a 4-lane divided road, and we want to set our elevation step to the smallest possible one, just being 1.25 meters. Now, the best elevation I've found this to work at is 375 meters, but you can also do it at 2.5 if you like, but 3.75 has been the magic one for me. So now you just want to draw this in, use whatever curve tool you want to get this to work. I'm going to use continuous curve here. I'm going to fill in that area that I've just done. Then you'll notice that we still maintain the zoning, so you can zone here, you can place buildings on it, but on the level that you've terraformed under the water, you now have a very smooth, perfectly level quay road that will now create a waterfront or a quay wall or a port, whatever you want it to function as. You can do it. We'll go ahead and do the same process on a bit of land that hasn't been terraformed so you can see the difference of it. So you want to kind of line it up here, basically halfway between the land and the road. And then we could do it here and you can see it's going to start changing heights as well, which will make it a little bit more uneven for your final product. But it's pretty easy. You just want to keep it lined up right in the middle of the land and the water. We have something that looks a little bit like that. Okay, so it's not quite as even. It's kind of sloping down. That's just because we didn't terraform and prepare it first of all. But you do maintain those zoning squares on the opposite side, so you can turn it into a waterfront if you wanted to place parks or commercial up here. But if you do the terraforming first, it's going to be much more level, much more precise, exactly how you want it to look. Whereas if you don't prepare it, it's going to follow the shape of the land like it has done over there. So you might prefer that. It's entirely up to you really how you want to do this, but definitely for creating these quay walls, I would suggest terraform that flat layer. Once you have terraformed it, you can also come back in with soften as well and just blend it back in so it looks a little bit more natural. But definitely do the underwater terraforming first, then terraform the land, and then do the road. Then once you've done that, you can place in your assets such as a fire station, and then you're going to have a fire station by your waterfront. So really cool bit of functionality. Again, it has kind of essentially replaced quays, but does allow you to build kind of proper waterfront roads. Very cool. Really nice addition into the game, I think. To have these kind of adaptive networks that just mold and change the terrain. So that'd be my suggestions. Terraform, 3.75 meters is a sweet spot. So keep it on 3.75 meters on its lowest elevation step, and you'll end up with nice, smooth waterfront quays like this. So I'd like to spend the second half of this tutorial just kind of talking over the new Cowan Fill and kind of embanking features that are now available with CS2's road engine. This is quite similar to what we just looked at in terms of the kind of waterfront quay roads, but depending on the terrain that you do this sort of technique on, it can lead to some very interesting possibilities for CS2's kind of base game road engine. So I'm going to talk through a process here. So let's say, for example, we have a change in elevation here that you would like to transition with road. Now in CS1 you might develop kind of a switchback road here where you might just draw the road straight up, and you'll see it tries to generate that automatic kind of filled retaining wall there, which is fine, that's cool functionality. But this is quite a bit more powerful than that. So let's kind of walk through a process here of how we can manipulate the terrain around networks to create some very interesting retaining walls. So we're going to draw this out just up here, okay? And then the road I want to connect to, let's say this is going to be a little bit further down here. Now we want to extend any terraforming to line up with this one because we want it to be in line, and you'll kind of see how this works here in a second. So I want to draw this road down so it's in line with that road guideline of the road we just drew in, this one right here, but we don't want to connect them just yet, okay? And then just amend that terraforming back in line with wherever we had it. Of course, this might be terraforming you've already done yourself, or it could just be a natural terrain elevation change in the map. But as with most CS2 road stuff, I definitely recommend preparing the terrain first of all. So we have something that looks like that, okay? Pretty weird at the minute. So now let's start manipulating the terrain so this new kind of cut and fill feature starts behaving how we want it to. So I'm actually going to increase the elevation here on the top layer by maybe 4 or 5 contour lines, not an enormous amount. What we want to do is create that change in elevation, so as we draw the road down toward this one over here, the game thinks that we kind of want to cut through this big chunk of land, and it will create a retaining wall for us. You'll kind of see how this works here. And then what I want to do in the bottom layer where we drew this road is to actually kind of do the opposite of here. I want to sink it down a little bit. So again, we'll go down by 4 or 5 contour lines, something like that should do. And then we'll paint this out along the bottom layer as well. Now what I want to do here is to put this change in elevation basically in line with the road guideline that runs between these two roads, okay? So I just want to go push it roughly to where that road is going to sit. About there for me, I think. Something like that. Should be pretty cool. Now what you can also do here is actually just push this terrain layer a little bit further in line with this road guideline, and then even further around the side. And then what you're going to start doing here is creating kind of automatic retaining walls against this higher layer of land. So you'll see as we draw through here, you're going to see how it's going to cut into it. So you get a retaining wall that looks like that. Now these retaining walls, they do automatically adjust to terrain layers. You'll see how it shifts as we level it off here. So even if you don't get it in perfectly first time, a little bit of level terrain will just start to create this retaining wall for you. So that's only going to appear if you manipulate the terrain beforehand to behave like that. And basically the same thing is going to happen here, right? So we're going to cut through this layer of land. So on the bottom layer, it's going to create that retaining wall that we had on the waterfront quay a little bit earlier on in the video. And then on that top layer, it's going to slice through the terrain that we manipulated with this kind of 4 or 5 contour line elevation over here. And again, the same thing will happen here if we level back out to the terrain height that we want. The retaining wall will also bend to that height as well. It's an incredibly cool tool to have baked into the base game engine of CS2. I'm very happy to see it. Oh look, we're getting some fall trees as well. Very nice. Always love a fall tree. Shows how long I've been in this map already. And then we want to just also put this one back as well so it's level with the initial road that we drew it off of course, without encroaching upon the retaining wall either. So hopefully that's a pretty basic example. I definitely recommend playing with this setup first of all, just so you can get an impression of how this kind of behaves and how the new road networks respond to terrain in CS2 now. And then you'll end up with that, and of course you can just imagine the different possibilities you can do with this. You can bring it around this side as well if we were to draw this road off a little bit further. Let's bring it kind of down this way, and then we could draw it against there. We can see that retaining wall extends now because it's trying to cut through that elevation where we draw it, which is why it's so important that you prepare the terrain beforehand. And then you can end up with something that looks a little bit like that. You know, you can position a more important asset on here and have it sat on a retaining wall within the grander cityscape. So I hope that gives you an example of how powerful and interesting this new cut and fill feature can be. With a little bit of terrain manipulation and a little bit of pre-planning with your networks, you can do some really cool stuff. And of course, this is a very basic example. You can do many different shapes and sizes of roads, bridges coming off and over the top of it, creating multiple different cool layers. You'll have to excuse some of the awkward shadowing. It's obviously not quite as it's intended to be here, is it? But you get the general impression, right? Exceedingly cool feature, the new cut and fill stuff. So have a play with that, and then essentially let your imagination run wild with what is possible now. So once you blend this into a cityscape, you can really begin to see what is possible with CS2's new vanilla base game road mechanics. And you know what's to come once this gets a little bit of mod action on it as well, you know. It's very powerful. This is one of the biggest things I'm a huge fan of in the game. But anyway, now this is here, this is also a good opportunity to now talk about stacked roads as well. So we'll come in and grab ourselves a regular 2-lane road here. Now you can mix and match different stacks. You don't always have to be... Basically what's on top doesn't have to be on the bottom if you want to stack a road. And there's a great example here of using stacked roads. So let's come out from this top intersection. And we want to make sure we're lined up with the guideline of the road we're coming out from. And then we just want to elevate up until it begins to become stacked, probably about 10 meters here. And then you'll just notice as you draw it over it, it gets the pillars, and then as you come onto a wider road, the pillar will just extend to meet that road beneath. So just a simple case of elevating above existing infrastructure. So let's say if we come out here, and now we will have a stacked road that runs from that layer over this one, and just fills that half of it there as well. I'm sure you could as well here if you wanted to. Actually upgrade this into a 4-lane road and then have it kind of, you know, lean over the 2-lane road a little bit more and then fully match the 4-lane road that is about to go over. So stacked roads are really easy, just a case of elevating up an existing elevation already, and then they will simply draw across and over like this. You get some very cool kind of New York inspired infrastructure doing this sort of stuff. So really cool to see stacked roads in the base game of CS2 as well. This took quite a few mods in CS1 to make this possible. So yeah, definitely look forward to stacking some roads in your higher density areas. I'm sure you'll have a ton of fun with it. Especially when you do begin to blend it with all the new cut and fill stuff, right? And gives you a little sense of what's possible now in CS2's vanilla road mechanics. So let's spend the last part of this tutorial just talking over highway roads and how they work, because there's some new kind of snapping options and stuff that you can do with them. So let's take this highway, for example, here. This is just the one that comes with the map. And say, for example, I wanted this to be 3-lane to handle a little bit more traffic. We can just grab our replace tool and upgrade it. However, you'll notice that, especially if your existing geometry is turned off, that this upgrade is really kind of too fluid. Like, you can upgrade it into that, which would look ridiculous and make no sense at all. So when you are upgrading them, snapping to existing geometry will give you that kind of firmer snap, as you can see. So definitely worth having that on. So we can see now we've got this slip lane here that's come off the peanut about. It's come down onto the highway, and then the highway merges back into 2-lane, which is fine, but we'll extend this 3-lane down for a little bit further. So now let's grab our 1-lane, one-way highway, which is what we would use for a slip road coming off here. And you can see that it just snaps into each of the lanes, and you can draw it off whichever lane you want. So in this case, you'd want it coming off the far left lane, and we might want to kind of draw it parallel here, but you see how it's kind of snapping in? Once you've got your placement, turning off snap to existing geometry will stop that from happening, kind of snapping it into the road. So then you can just bend it off and do whatever you want with it, form an interchange ramp or just a little quick slip access ramp into the city, whatever you want. But what I definitely recommend doing for this beforehand is upgrading the 3-lane road first and then placing your slip lanes in. Same thing as well if you're coming off of an interchange. Definitely set up your lane mathematics before drawing in the slip ramps. Another example of that here, you can see I might want to upgrade this section here to give a little more room for this runoff ramp to take place. And again, it's all a bit wobbly. That's because we have our snap to existing geometry turned off, so we want to make sure that that is there. And then you'll see kind of as you move your upgrade tool across the highway, it tries to sort of guess where you want the slip ramp to occur. You want to make sure that it's just aligned with where the side of the highway that slip ramp is on, and then you'll see it'll just generate it automatically for you as you upgrade that, and then you'll have the slip ramp coming on if you want people to have a little bit more runoff room as they come to exit the highway and then get onto whatever interchange you do have set up. And don't forget that the game now has a huge selection of preset interchanges. They're pretty massive. They're absolutely enormous, but they are still pretty cool. And there's just a huge amount of them, so no longer do we just have 2 intersections to play with. There's a stack interchange in here as well, which is absolutely enormous. So yeah, nice to have some preset interchanges, so don't forget to play with them as well. You don't always have to go and build your own now like you did in CS1. If you're not particularly comfortable with highways, then do make use of those preset intersections, but you will have to unlock them via the development tree if indeed you aren't playing with everything unlocked from the start. But otherwise, guys, that is going to do it for our Road Tools Basics tutorial. I hope you found it useful. If you have, likes, comments and shares below. Really do help me out, and don't forget to subscribe if you are looking for more CS2 content. There will be plenty of it in the run-up to the launch, and therefore after as well as we begin building in CS2. I am an enormous lover of how flexible and versatile all these new vanilla road tools are. Now you compare this to CS1's vanilla road tools, and it's absolutely night and day, isn't it? To build retaining walls now and stacked roads, all in the game engine, is exceedingly exciting. I can't wait to see what everyone comes up with across the community and indeed in our Discord, which is linked down below. If you'd like to come and share any screenshots or just get involved with a nice friendly CS2 community, do come and hang out with us. All those links are down below. I think I've covered everything here that is to do with road tools. If you have any questions or need help on some further elaboration on anything we talked about today, come and ask us in the Discord. There will be plenty of help there available from me and the moderators, I'm sure. Big shout out to all the patrons supporting the channel, and a special roll call for Felix Wilkinson. But otherwise, I'll shut up and leave it there. I'd like to thank you all so much for watching, and as always, enjoy the rest of your day.